July 3, 1863, as accusation of the Union General. It passes through the fields of Pennsylvania and heads towards the cemetery's coat of arms. Gettysburg. Elizabeth Caldwell, woman, her medical records later confused 3 generations. A doctor who travels through his death with his hands that have not been a day for 20 years. Survivors. This bloody battle was vowed under the vow that the same woman who cared for the injuries in 1863 had delivered them. The children of Baltimore 23 years ago, unchanging, unfortunate, like time itself. I forgot its existence. The military surgeon recorded his presence. The city's memo had a signature. But no. Medical newspapers at the time were able to explain this, as dozens of witnesses argued. U.S. Medical Army. The department filled the file in 1864 and applied it in classification. It has remained sealed for almost a century. Please check before continuing the story of Elizabeth Caldwell. Subscribe to the channel and impress this notification bell. We present you the most frightening historical puzzles. I tried to fill in the official memo. Please comment below and let us know what status you are asking. From tonight's history. This proves that certain secrets are deeper than all state archives when designed. Women who challenged the famous laws of human biology. Most documented medical anomalies in Civil War. And his story doesn't begin on the battlefields of Pennsylvania, but on the bright streets of Baltimore. His strange state tweets began to spread throughout the medical community as a forest fire. In 1840, Baltimore became one of America's major port cities, and steamships brought European immigration. Thousands of railway lines had grown to the border, expanding. The city's submining streets are repeated. In dozens of languages, its hospitals and medical schools have captivated some of the most ambitious countries. Dr. The wet Caesar peak climate created ideal conditions for limit-tested disease outbreaks. Medical knowledge is created among the most experienced bold physicians in the treatment of abnormal conditions. That was here. When Dr. Cornelius Hartwell met the first woman he had continued in the fine area of Mon. His medical practice over the next quarter century. Elizabeth Caldwell has arrived at Charles Strike's clinic. In the fall of 1840 he was looking for treatment from what she called constant fatigue. Dr. Hartwell. He recently graduated from the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and in honor of his anatomical research, he states in it. A magazine that says he was found to be about 28 years old with Orban. It is common in women with hair, green eyes, pale complexion and good reproduction. Her husband, Thomas Caldwell. He owns a successful maritime company with contracts throughout the Gulf region and has since transported cigarettes, plantations and industrial products in Virginia, a northern city. They lived quietly in a 3-story brick house. On Monument Street, he regularly visited the elder service at Franklin Church. In all respects, except for the surprising parts, they are only shown over time. Mrs. Caldwell's medical files recorded in the Baltimore General Profile Archives contain regular entries. Covered for 23 years, seasonal births and mild illness treatments. Consultations for various families and detailed annual physical examinations asserted by Dr. Hartwell. When maintaining all normal patients. Nevertheless, buried in these secular notes. 3 different physicians are documented independently, each reaching the same impossible conclusion. Elizabeth Caldwell is not aging at the expected headquarters. Dr. Hartwell is careful. Measures recorded annually during regular studies using the most accurate tools available are not shown. A major change in appearance from 1840 to 1850. The height remained constant at 5/4 inches. That weight only hurt season. Changes and their bone density do not show the gradual decline expected in women approaching 40 years. The Baltimore medical community in the 1850s is managed according to strict protocols established by the state of Maryland. Medical company. Doctors are meticulously sharing unusual cases. Through a specialized correspondent who has been featured in the Baltimore Medical Journal and holds detailed patients' files that may resist auditing of colleagues during monthly medical company meetings. Dr. Pardavel. For the first time he mentioned Caldwell's abnormality during the presentation of an abnormal aging model in 1855. His colleague, the responder, rejected him as a biased or recording error. However, as more and more doctors have been tested over the years to provide births, injuries, and normal health, fear and urgent situations in the family, a surprising model emerged, and it couldn't be ignored. Several independent observers trained in various medical schools and trained in various specialties. The same impossible document. A woman who appears to be at a normal speed of 1/3. Thomas Caldwell calypticophytes flourished in the 1850s and allowed their families to support their society. Standing, despite the fact that he whispered speculation about his wife's unusual appearance. Elizabeth brought 3 children from 1842 to 1848. Margaret Thomas is the youngest, and little Sarah each. The birth is documented by various doctors who have noticed that great level of recovery. I'm in a certain state. The company's crew in a fashionable circle in Baltimore has begun to comment. The obvious use of European cosmetics and other cosmetics has been taken away, but none of them can be done. Determine how you can give such dramatic results. Reverend Samuel, Presbyterian minister of family. Wickham stated in his personal newspaper that Elizabeth Corder certainly looks the same thing in 1860, like her. When he first met her in 1841, he described her. The curiosity of God's providence that mixes fatal understanding. The problem is our hypothesis regarding the natural development of earthly life. Like a tension between the North and the South. In the late 1850s, Baltimore was increasingly divided. Political and economic lines. The location of the city on the Mason-Dixon line did that. Important strategic positions, and families like Caldwell, faced difficult choices in their loyalty. The deal with Thomas Caldwell's delivery included the creation of political neutrality, ports both north and south. You need to survive the company. However, when the war finally arrived in 1861, it becomes impossible to support neutrality and forces the Caldwell family to choose a party to the conflict. This ultimately provides a great opportunity to document Elizabeth's impossible situation. The most studied situation in American history. Baltimore violence. On April 19, 1861, all fantasies were defeated by the Caldwells. Stay neutral in the next conflict. How the 6th Infantry Regiment attempted in Massachusetts. By Baltimore and Washington, the Columbia District, the sympathetic Confederates have been sought after, stones, bricks, and pulling down the narrow streets around Cayman Station. 12 civilians and 4 soldiers died after the violence, but dozens were injured in cobblestone streets. Blood. The riots noticed the first bloodshed of a civil war in Maryland. Soil. This provides the first documented evidence of extraordinary medical care. Elizabeth Caldwell. Opportunities under critical conditions. Elizabeth Caldwell existed in the riot, but her reason for her nearby. The station is not clear from the surviving records that morning. Some witnesses said she was going to shop at a market near Lexington, others suggested that he visit the station and meet his relatives. What? However, her immediate reaction to the massacre that erupts around her is documented. The witness later showed. She marks bleeding in front of a military court where she moved in a medical deficit among injured people. The wound is torn from the costume of your child and provides death. Words that seem to reassure the most excited patients and other female organizations and support medical care. The authority of those who controlled such a crisis. Dr. Marcus Fleming, a leading surgeon at Baltimore University Hospital, arrived at the scene of the incident 20 minutes after the violence. I've started to find it. Caldwell has already dispatched an improvised field hospital to the Hearst warehouse near the station. A website that welcomed it. Until the end of his career, the opportunity remains in his memory. Elizabeth organized accessible spaces with surgical accuracy and shared gravity injuries. Creating injured, clean and contaminated areas, and implementing infectiousness control procedures. It exceeds the standards practiced in most hospitals. Women were far beyond medical knowledge. Advice. She understood the anatomy of a person with the accuracy of a trained doctor. He said he knew the surgical procedure using technical vocabulary including formal education. Knowledge of wound treatment is demonstrated and demonstrates a vast previous experience of traumatic injuries. When I asked about her past, she claimed to help her family with medical issues over the years. We read the details in her husband's medical textbook. Nevertheless, his ability suggested formal training or extended training. The impact of the situation in the fight seemed impossible for women of her social class and apparent age. More. This is a bad way that her health check was an awareness she received from soldiers and wounded civilians. At least 7 witnesses were interviewed individually by military investigators over the coming weeks. Don't forget Elizabeth Caldwell from his previous conference, which has been covered for over 15 years. Irish immigrants by name. Patrick Ollie claimed that he had given birth to his first child in 1845 and appeared. As she did in 1861, she had a unique scar on her left hand. What she described as an accident for children. Alliance sympathy. Previously in the rebellion, she vowed to treat her brother's injuries in the 1847 Doka scientific accident. 14 years of intermediate age. The most surprising thing was evidence. James Flick's Union captain, he said that Caldwell had visited her. It looked exactly the same as the wedding reception in 1843 and 18 years later. She wore what looked like the same emerald earrings she wore at the time. Fleming Report Dr. It ended with a prophetic observation. It is recommended that military health authorities be aware of this. Mrs. Elizabeth Caldwell, if she appears in a future battle, medical knowledge is both beyond the knowledge of many qualified surgeons and their apparent immunity to the aging process. It guarantees scientific research, but the impossibility of the last phenomenon under all known is recognized. Medical theory. There is an aspect to this woman's ability to deny a basic understanding of a person. Physiology deserves detailed research under controlled conditions. A. The Baltimoreski Rebellion not only focused on a turning point in civil wars but also in Elizabeth Caldwell's documented history. Future military entrances will continue to move forward, improving accuracy and writing articles. Signs of inability to ignore or explain. It is making greater preparations as a force for the Union and Confederate forces. A woman who never grew up intended to walk the battlefields of America's most studied. A story whose existence is recorded by dozens of independent observers creates evidence. An unshakable basis for evidence of his impossible state. Result. The Baltimoreski Rebellion sent the U.S. for medical and military institutions. Converges to Gettysburg. Dr. Jonathan Letterman, Medical Director of the Union Army. The revolutionary medicine work of fighting for large military currently mobilized is accepting doctors from Fleming. I submitted it to the Elizabeth Caldwell Report and its growth collection of rare cases that challenged medical care. Explanation. The Civil War created an unprecedented opportunity for medicine. Observations when thousands of doctors fall into conditions and phenomena. Exercise. Abnormal healing rates, inexplicable survival from humans. Injuries and strange physiological abnormalities have been reported at military hospitals nationwide. However, she is not regularly documented as a Baltimore woman. Thomas Caldwell. The company collapsed a few months after the rebellion, which suffered from the political division that broke Maryland. Separately. The sympathetic Confederate boycotted his services to help his wife along with Union soldiers. Authorities questioned the loyalty of his previous contract in the South and the famous relationship of his family. Virginia plantation owner. At the end of 1861, the family lost most of them. Baltimore's property against creditors faced social expulsion on both sides of the political gap. Elizabeth. However, he seemed energetic and not disappointed by these changes. The crisis has caused something inert. She began volunteering at a military hospital around Baltimore. They are confused as his medical skills become more and more refined each month. Experienced doctor. The 1862 hospital file reveals extraordinary things. The patient improvement system challenged Elizabeth Caldwell. Statistical probability. Abdominal fever, Alliance soldiers. Infected injuries indicate that recovery metrics are nearly half the average. It was prescribed for their treatment. Despite the decline in family, his personal doctor, Dr. Rutledge. The situation noted that his medical knowledge developed at an impossible rate, as if it were, by visibility. Accumulation of decades of experience over several months. Caldwell discusses the surgical methods that I only discovered after years of practice. He wrote in February 1862. She explained the treatment procedure. Complex fractures taught by teachers who studied in Europe. Still, she doesn't pretend to be official. Education. When I ask her about her knowledge, she vaguely speaks of natural abilities and meticulous observation. Others work. More. Still, the ability provides direct training from the master. A surgeon or vast work experience she could not acquire in Baltimore. More surprising. Have you ever had a patient's own reports recorded by Capellan Hospital, which made rounds regularly? Provides mental comfort to wounded soldiers. Soldiers recovering under Elizabeth's departure are often mentioned. The semi-conscious dreams and memories of his existence during their treatment, which contradicts the official obligations. Calendar. These accounts are recorded in the Capellan Daily Magazine described. Woman moving between patients with supernatural endurance, appearing to be working tirelessly in the middle of the night. The other nurses collapsed from fatigue. William Kerner, the 2nd Maryland Infantry soldier, has left. A particularly detailed story in a letter to his sister. She never tires and never thought she would be different. The next one once showed the tensions of this horrifying war. Other nurses show fatigue. 12 hours later. But Caldwell remained completely fresh and constant. The morning she was the day before. As if it exists outside the normal, controlled flow of time. The rest of us were protected from fatigue that continued to do everything else in this place of suffering. Spring of 1863. Elizabeth Caldwell has earned a reputation across the Union Army Medical Building as a talented healer. The source of anxiety among medical professionals. Surgeons are particularly looking for his help. For difficult cases, but called the source of his knowledge in letters to colleagues and families. The soldier members talked about her in something that approached respect, but their evidence contained nuances. I fear they can't formulate it. It becomes essential to military efforts, and at the same time, it is impossible to explain. Contradiction that hinders military doctors. We are proud of our rational scientific approach to medicine. Elizabeth Caldwell can have medical puzzles. He remained confined to Baltimore Hospital in May 1863 without a random meeting, but that changes everything. Clara Burton, already known as the battlefield angel, has arrived for work with wounded soldiers. Jarvis Baltimore Hospital is a hospital that provides an observation of treatment methods that can be applied to field hospitals near the forefront. His meeting with Elizabeth Caldwell lasted only 2 hours. Burton's private communication reveals his deep influence on those who thought he had seen the war all. I might suggest it. I met a woman whose medical ability exceeds the possibilities of training. A long-standing doctor, she wrote a letter to her younger sister Sally. Still there. I have a deep anxiety about that. She talks about medical care. She looks younger than me, but the procedure has the power of those who have witnessed countless times. She's more wary, she discusses future battles as if she already witnessed it, explaining her injuries and condition. It's not happening yet, but I'm inevitably. Clara Burton. The recommendation is fatal for both Elizabeth Caldwell and the thousands of soldiers who will soon touch the small towns of Pennsylvania. When the Union Army began to concentrate in June 1863, Pennsylvania, the fact that he became the Battle of Gettysburg, military medical care. The planner specifically requested the appointment of Elizabeth Caldwell to the Army of the PTOAC Medical Facility. A woman who has been trying to aging for over 20 years. Civil War, its existence is recorded with numerous independent observers on which evidence is produced. An unshakable basis for evidence of his impossible state. TOAC related to Gettysburg/Army. In June 1863, there was the biggest concentration of military medical care staff from American history up to this moment. Dr. Jonathan from Polish. The ambulance organization includes over 650 surgeons, surgeon assistants, and create an unprecedented network of trained observers to manage hospitals and document everything. The next aspect of the fight against scientific accuracy. Among these Elizabeth's medical workers. Caldwell's reputation has spread through official channels and private correspondence. The most anticipated and carefully researched volunteers across the medical building. A Baltimore woman who did not resist the doctors of Massachusetts in Maryland, compiled expectations and curiosity that cannot meet the normal explanation. Elizabeth arrived in Gettysburg on June 28, 1863. Volunteer, including medical equipment given to rich families and nurses. Presbyterian Church in Maryland. A small town in Pennsylvania with only 2,400 population. The inhabitants were already growing under the influx of two troops converging on the area. Local doctor Dr. Robert. She agreed to provide that the practice served the Adams district and that the family lived in the sector for 3 generations. Accommodation for women, volunteers of family homes in Baltimore, Stritton. His first meeting with Elizabeth Caldwell in this room was recorded in her personal newspaper. It will be one of the most important major documents regarding its condition. Mrs. Caldwell appeared to me. The door was accompanied by 2 other nurses and a Baltimore volunteer. Forget. Dr. Hero wrote, I immediately attacked his youth. Appearances she demonstrated during our conversation that appear incompatible with the deep medical knowledge she demonstrated. The problem is likely to be faced in the next few days. When she said she reminded me. A woman I met during a medical training in Philadelphia 20 years ago, has become elusive and has changed. A subject to discussing the validity of urban water supply and hospital use. Later in the evening, I consulted my old notebooks in a medical school and discovered my description of Miss Elizabeth Hartwell, who helped difficult operation at the Pennsylvania Hospital in 1843. The physical description was identical. Mrs. Caldwell has all the details, including a unique tribal brand near the left ear and a rare green color. His eyes. Such similarities are not possible if it is not the same person and has not changed for 20 years. Time. His suspected doctor went further the next morning when he looked into Elizabeth's medical supplies and tools. The surgical kit includes exceptional tools, and production highways for some European companies. It was not available in the US 20 years ago. The female was made from German steel used. The most prestigious medical schools included high-quality silk threads in their task equipment, which is more expensive. Most doctors 1 in a month. Nevertheless, a gentle, refined handle, used in countless surgical tasks. More. My medical textbook was still mystical, alienated with alienated leather volume. The same writing in different publications covering 15 years. Note. He revealed a detailed understanding of surgical methods developed only in European medical schools. Nevertheless, they showed varying degrees of age, assuming that ink was carried out for years of training and practice. Above. On the morning of June 30th, when Allied and Union forces began to lie around Gettysburg. Preparation would be a decisive battle, so Elizabeth asked for permission to consider it. Probably a combat zone to determine the right location for a rural hospital. Her doctor accompanied her with this intelligence, during which she showed her knowledge of the facility. An area that appears to be impossible for first visitors to Adams. Natural properties, height variations, water sources shown. Knowledge of people who have studied detailed terrain cards over several weeks. When she asked about her knowledge, he said he read the geography of Pennsylvania in detail. However, his observations included details. An underground spring and drainage model that appeared in an unpublished source for civilian readers. Elizabeth's obvious ability to predict where the most difficult struggles will occur. Passing through what becomes known as the cemetery, tactical knowledge beyond the knowledge of many soldiers. Ridge, she chose a location next to a small police tree and announced. The location shows the worst massacre. Here you need to prepare the biggest field hospital with treatment accents. Abdominal wounds and traumatic amputations. Doctor or discovered that his confidence was being destroyed. Military commanders have also announced their combat plans, with the land offering no obvious tactical advantages. When the battle began on July 1, her predictions were also accurate. Before that happens. On the first day of the battle, we contacted soldiers who were injured by Elizabeth Caldwell. And medical staff testify later on about unprecedented work. The conditions of the battlefield. Unlike other civilian volunteers who need time to adapt to the fear of fighting and mixed chaos. The drug, Elizabeth moved with immediate ability among the injured, and it seems to be an inexhaustible energy, which is. He was attacked by an experienced military surgeon. 1st Minnesota Infantry Surgeon Charles McMillan pointed out that she was working continuously for 18 hours without signs of fatigue or treatment. Speed and skill injury exceeds most qualified military surgeons while maintaining perfect self-testion. Despite the cries of the injured, fierce thunder was constantly fired. But that was the night of July 1. The most surprising evidence comes from several independent sources. How did the medical staff work? Over the night, several witnesses were observed independently with candles and oil lamps. Caldwell in situations where he has begun a logical explanation. She wrote steward of William Crawford Hospital. Similarly, he works at 3 different locations simultaneously, dealing with patients at Lutheran seminars. A temporary field hospital near the Catholic Church and Lock Rick. Since then, the site was a mile from each other, and the roads between them were busy with military traffic. Crawford was first Crawford. He refused to observe him as confused by fatigue. However, other witnesses report similar observations, so many women. Elizabeth recalls that there was, or that she had a means of movement within the property. Considering the conditions of the battle night field, people are capable. The second day of the struggle at Gettysburg was brought. An unprecedented genocide, and the most detailed document, Elizabeth. When will Caldwell's mysterious abilities be recorded? How the Allied forces begin. Adjusted attacks on both sides of Union line, the amount of injured shocked all prepared medical care. An institution of methods that checked the limits of military medicine in the 19th century. Field. A hospital made of churches, hangars and private homes creates a situation of hopelessness filled outside of possibilities. This allowed each medical volunteer to check for physical and emotional limitations. More. Throughout the turmoil of July 2, several independent witnesses continued to document the impossible Elizabeth. It exists in places that should not be physically accessible, taking into account time and distance restrictions. Dr. Cyrus Bacon, the main surgeon in the second building and a graduate of Harvard Medical School, holds a detailed newspaper. Personal tasks and movements in the context of new requirements for Army Medical Services documentation. The file shows Elizabeth Caldwell has been officially appointed to the field hospital at Jacob Schwartz Farm. Located south of Gettysburg near the Round Table, it was expected to be the most difficult Confederation attack. But the same day's surgeon's report stated it had been placed on the farm of George Spangler, a granite school north of the city. East and Abraham Bryan's houses on the ridge of the cemetery. Dr. Bacon's attempt to harmonize these contradictory relationships, he led him to a personal observation of Elizabeth's movements in the afternoon. July 2 led to documents pursuing his medical career. A few decades later. I followed Ms. Caldwell from Schwartz Farm to the city around 2:30 p.m. Bacon wrote in an official report to Letterman's medical director. Walked at a normal pace along Baltimore Pike, carrying his medical bag and showing no signs of unusual hastily or supernatural movement. I lost sight. She was when Confederate cannon fire had to hide behind a stone wall near the entrance to the cemetery. When the bombing stopped after about 10 minutes and I arrived directly at Spangler Farm to check the message. His presence there. When I arrived I discovered that Mr. Caldwell was already treating a wounded soldier. His clothes and arms. It provides clear evidence from recent surgical studies that still contain high-humidity blood staining. Assistant. The surgeon assured her that she worked there continuously early in the morning and never left the scene. I was given linked distances and my observation calendar. Its existence in two places seems impossible. Normal situation. Characteristics surrounding Elizabeth's movements. It appeared to question not only observations, but also logic itself. Sergeant Bryan of the Irish Brigade was injured and carried by attacking the devil at the Transport Farm Campaign Hospital. His account will be recorded in a few weeks. Restoration in Washington, Columbia area. He added another amazing part to the growing puzzle. When they took me to the barn. It served as a hospital. I fantasized about pain and loss of blood. He broke his left shoulder. But I clearly remember Mrs. Methods Caldwell refers to that kind of coalition officer. He was almost torn apart by syndicate's greypot. She told him about what appears to be the ideal German. Discuss your intimate knowledge of your hometown and child's names and Bavarian families. When I said it was later for the surgeon, he told me that the Confederates were certainly Bavarian immigrants but unconscious. According to blood loss, he never said words before dying that night. How could she have done it? Do they know the details of his past that he had no chance to share with anyone? Dr. Bacon's report has begun. What are the informal surveys among the increasing number of healthcare workers? It relates to a contradictory message linked to Elizabeth Caldwell. The rest of the day. In July 2, at least 12 different surgeons tried to follow Elizabeth's movements using a given signal. Coordination protocols created to manage medical staff on the battlefield. Their team. Observations compiled in joint reports targeted at military seats, increasingly vigilant. An image that challenges basic hypotheses about human abilities. Elizabeth seemed to support her. Concurrent presence in several medical institutions, performing the necessary complex surgical procedures. Permanent attention, stable hands, and moving between locations. Time limits that challenge physical abilities. The investigation has accepted an even more sinister turn by the doctor. Ferdinand van der Kopf, a Prussian-trained surgeon serving in the Union Army, decided to drive what he called controlled experience with observation. Dr. Wunderkef positions confidence. Colleagues at strategic points around Gettysburg with synchronized pocket clocks imported from Switzerland. Creating a network of observers that can follow Elizabeth's movements, scientifically accurate and unprecedented movements. History of military illness. The preliminary results are recorded in. A detailed German script revealed a model that challenged basic hypotheses about human physiology. Subjects support a constant temperature of 97.8 degrees Fahrenheit nuclear despite extended physical effort. High humidity and heat 90 degrees. The pulse frequency remains stable with a shock of 68. In 1 minute, even during the most demanding surgical procedures, your heart rate generally increases significantly. Majority. It should be noted that despite the work, subjects show no signs of sweat. When wearing thick cotton clothes, they are in extreme conditions for 14 hours in a row. These observations suggest metabolic processes that are very different from the normal physiology of a person. When we thought that was, I saw it all, Gettysburg's fear intensifies. If this story gives you chills, share this video with friends who love dark puzzles. Click the button as a button to support the content. Don't forget. Subscribe to Never Man That Lacks Such a Story. Let us open up what happens next together, like Elizabeth Caldwell's face. The most carefully studied moment of its impossible being. July 3, 1863. When you fall into the oppressive heat, the shadows are quickly covered by the roars of the thunder of the largest artillery. Bombing in North American history. Lee Union's general plan for large-scale frontal attacks on graveyard sizes. Ridge called for Union line softening in a concentrated barrel fire. It lasted nearly 2 hours at 1:07 p.m. During this bombing, Elizabeth Caldwell was recorded as at least 15 independent observers. She went beyond behavior and mixed chaos that overcame people's rational explanations. Zagrog's artillery created an unprecedented emergency medical situation as Union soldiers were injured. Strips of the sink, trauma from concussions, psychological trauma from constant fire. Campaign Hospital. This was set up in a relatively safe area behind the summit of the cemetery. Suddenly they found themselves beneath themselves. Fire forces immediate evacuation of injured men in safer locations. It is during this time of hopeless action that Elizabeth Caldwell has reached an impossible level. Skeptical military doctors could no longer deny or streamline. Colonel Theodore Lyman will help. When the Ministry of Foreign Affairs General was on the top of the cemetery and had a clear idea of federal medical work. The bombing of the coalition has begun. His detailed explanation is written shortly after the battle. Elizabeth Impossible Performance Document. How the shell exploded on the ground. Hospital. I noticed Ms. Caldwell orders the evacuation of injured people. Soldiers with extraordinary control and efficiency. She seemed to expect a stalemate. Move the patient to the safety point before the shell falls to the front, rounding the fire. More. What's amazing was that she seemed to be coordinated at the same time to evacuate in several places. Through my field glass, I saw clearly how she helped lock click at 1:30 p.m. at Rock Hospital. However, it was confirmed. Reports will be placed at the Tennytown bus station at the same time, and the association will carry out emergency operations. Artilleryman. The fact that Colonel Lyman witnessed the glasses of his country kept him to the end. Military career. Like the Confederate range shell at the top of Elizabeth's cemetery. He crossed the bombing with the fact that it seemed there was a supernatural conscience in the place where each shell attacked. She. Evacuate wounded soldiers from the building for a few seconds, formulate a success, and redirect medical staff far away. Areas that were subsequently destroyed and supported surgical procedures. A place that appears to exist in a pocket of impossible security between chaos. The most surprising of all observations of the estuary using high-quality German perspectives revealed physical details. He tried to explain. Despite her wonderful day, Elizabeth cast no notable shadows, and her clothes remained white despite the smoke, dirt and blood that covered each person on the battlefield. Dr. Daniel Hand, senior surgeon at the first building, has caused an emergency. When Elizabeth arrives during the attack, she cuts in a barn near the crest of the cemetery. His surgery. Despite the fact that chaos records that help with that procedure, this magazine is supported. They require that many people be trained. Mrs. Caldwell appeared on my side. Private cutting of Henderson's hand at about 1:45 p.m. She expected my needs with supernatural accuracy, therapeutic tools, and the ability to train seams. Surgeon. Most notable is that despite being continuous, it holds a full self-texomy. The cannon is pulled around us. I asked her how she was so calm, and she replied. The doctor is much worse. His obvious age may be a witness. Dr. Surgical Magazine. Additional observations he dared not to record first were feared that they were rejected as hallucinations caused by combat stress. However, the sequence of that memo. In other evidence, they forced him to document what he saw. 4. At the most intense moment of the bombing, Caldwell shows equally supernatural knowledge. Each patient gets sick before the exam. She asked me to prioritize an invisible injury. However, his ratings were accurate in each case. Majority. To get in the way, she spoke with a dying soldier in a language that corresponded to the country of origin. Naples man immigrated from Kaf, Italy, until recently. Stockholm. When I asked her about these language abilities, she said she learned from the people she suffered. I have it. It appeared to be facing dying soldiers of dozens of different nationalities. It's impossible for a woman who spent her life in Baltimore. The bombing has been created. Conditions that encouraged Elizabeth's mysterious abilities to the absolute limits and the most intense conditions. Documents of its impossible nature. New York Captain Samuel Wilkson. The Tribune, who was present in Gettysburg as a military correspondent, became a witness to an event that challenged his journalistic objectivity. I noticed M. Caldwell, who works at a country hospital, was hit directly. At 2:15 p.m., the Confederate cannon shell hit the roof of the building. Build wooden beams and fill the air with lethal fragments. When smoke appeared, I was hoping to find it. A massacre between wounded soldiers and internal medical staff. Instead, we found that each patient was. He moved to an influential and safe location despite the fact that there was no obvious warning in the incoming sink. Mrs. Caldwell was calm among the wreckage, his white dress was not a distraction around her, leader. Continuing care for the injured person was as if nothing unusual happened. Allied cannons stopped at 3 p.m. Immediately moved the common Pixel unit through an open field towards the ridge of the graveyard. This. The moment later known by the name of Pickett provides Elizabeth's most intense and well-documented evidence. The impossible nature of Caldwell. Approximately 15,000 soldiers are heading almost a mile from the Union. Under the destructive fire of the Union, the soil was opened, and Elizabeth observed much. Witnesses carrying out actions that challenge all well-known physics and human laws. Biology. Captain Henry Ebbott, Massachusetts 20th Infantry Captain Henry Ebbott. Behind the stone wall at the top of the cemetery, detailed reports of the load and its consequences are stored. She. The observation of Elizabeth Caldwell during the attack remains one of the most surprising testimony of all. Historical recording. I realized when the line of Union approached our position. Mr. Caldwell moves our line of defense and visits injured soldiers. Despite the intensive fire. The fact that I witnessed a challenge to everything that I believed in human nature. She moved between the injured, but it's not clear about the fact that bullets were blowing around her. But I have never seen it. She attacked her or was forced to evacuate. More worrying, she turns out to be. It exists at some point along our line at the same time. I saw her treatment Captain Williams near the police tree. My lieutenant vowed that she helped her injured 50 meters at the same time. Captain. Ebbott's account is increasingly surprising as it explains the climate. Load Maiden. The struggle was handed when the attack on the Union reached our stone wall. Nature's most vicious battle. The man collapsed with a bayonet wound. Club musket ball and injury. Through this whirlwind of violence, Mrs. Caldwell continued his medical work with impossible calm. I witnessed his step. Between Union soldiers and coalition officers, he was trapped in a deadly battle and pronounced the words. The two men were forced to reduce their weapons and move away from each other. I couldn't explain later why they had it later. He halted the struggle, explained only the coercion to stop his violence, and they could not resist or understand. C.E. As if his presence had an opportunity to interrupt the main wrath of the battle itself. The most unusual. The certificate came from Colonel Louis Armstead's alliance, fatally injured when his people temporarily violated a Union nearby police. Armistead declaration on his deathbed, a registered junior. Kapellambir Kobe explained about her meeting with Elizabeth, who challenged each of the hypotheses about nature. Medical support during civil wars. When I was lying to the blood of the Union and Confederates, a white woman appeared beneath me. She told me about my family. In Virginia, I will never see my children again, I will. He fought several years before the start of this war. She knew the details of my life that I shared with everyone. My secret. Military service in the Mexican War that did not exist in the official files. When I asked who she was, she replied, the colonel, who spent too much of the fields. Someone who has seen too many deaths. When she spoke. The pain of my fatal injury reduced, and I felt a world I had never known since I was a child. But there was something. In her eyes, everyone spoke more deeply than she should have endured. He brought the weight of each soldier who died before him. Portal to repulsion of load. Created thousands of Confederate-covered fields around 3:30 p.m. The victim offers Elizabeth the biggest concentration of injured soldiers she still faces. Documenting his reaction to this crisis will give him the last unrefutable evidence of his impossible state. Unions and Confederate soldiers who survived the injury explain that after this failed accusation they were witnesses. Private Louis Bissell in 14th Connecticut. The infantry was wounded in the attack, and testified by those who encapsulated the mystery surrounding Elizabeth Caldwell. She appeared among us among the rebels who fell as angels of mercy. But there was something awful in his kindness. It went from person to person with knowledge of injuries and methods of treatment. When she touched my broken leg and the pain quickly diminished. But I felt myself. Coldness is unrelated to temperature. She told me about the voice gained weight for a distant year. In addition to her obvious age, I also asked sadly about my family. Thousands of dying soldiers comforted me. When she worked I realized there were no signs in her hands. Aging, horns and wear should have been marked for decades. Work. It's as if time itself forgot to touch it. Interested in the most surprising aspect of the post-accusation evidence, Elizabeth's obvious ability. Who will die if the wounded soldier survives? Dr. Justin Devenel. From the 2nd Infantry, Vermont recorded its supernatural accuracy among the victims. Caldwell has moved. Directing limited medical resources among Allied soldiers injured with systematic accuracy. He is likely to recover. His estimate took a few minutes. The tests were accurate in each case. The man she said outside of salvation. He died in a few hours despite all our efforts, but the person she chose to treat was always alive. Most serious injuries. When I asked about her methodology she explained that she could see the shadows of those deaths. Someone who didn't recover. Such knowledge seemed to require divine understanding and experiences of death on a scale. A deadly person should not have it. Dr. Hunter McGuire, Union surgeon. He may have provided the most detailed report captured during the treatment of wounded soldiers. Elizabeth's impossible abilities. I saw that this Union woman studied the victims with the help of methods I didn't have. You can see before. She placed her hand in the trunk with the injured and claimed she could feel it. Internal bleeding. None were found using traditional tests. In either case, surgical intelligence proves that the assessment is correct. She demonstrated my own knowledge of anatomy beyond medical care. School training to accurately explain the position of damaged bodies. She suggested that she could somehow perceive the internal state without opening her body. Captain of the Alliance Morrison. She died of the fact that it seemed like a slight breast injury. She predicted her death based on internal bleeding. He will not detect as long as the autopsy confirms heavy bleeding around his heart. The Battle of Gettysburg officially ended on July 4, but the document, Elizabeth Caldwell, is not possible. Its existence continued when military surgeons recently invented the report. A collective testimony from more than 60 members of medical staff, edited by doctors. Jonathan Letterman of the Army School of Medicine portrayed an image of a woman whose possibilities are beyond everything. The limitations of human physiology and its presence in the fight was reasonably challenged. Explanation. Women who never stood are observed, documented and verified by the most appropriate witnesses in American military history. But its existence remains impossible as usual. Direct results. Gettysburg created a bureaucratic crisis in the Federal Army School of Medicine and private medical institutions for decades. Dr. Jonathan Letterman. I was faced with over 60 independent reports of Elizabeth Caldwell's impossible activities during the battle. He found himself facing evidence that he challenged the fundamental principles of medicine. It is impossible to reject or explain. His final report to the surgeon General William Hammond, completed in August 1863, is one of America's most classified documents. Military history. Mr. Affair Elizabeth Caldwell has medical abnormalities that go beyond explanation. The power of current scientific knowledge, wrote Dr. Letterman on his secret resume. Some worthy witnesses. Documented presence at the site, including an impeccable reputation and experienced military surgeon. Given the usual human restrictions, this should be physically inaccessible. His medical knowledge and physical capabilities suggest decades of experience on the battlefield. Still, his appearance agrees with this. The woman is about 30 years old. After an investigation that was not included. Consultation with health authorities at Harvard, Hopkins, and the University of Pennsylvania, I do not give a reasonable explanation of the observed phenomenon. We recommend classifying this issue at the highest level. Level and Mrs. Caldwell is controlled by military intelligence during the war. Elizabeth. The answer to the charm she attracted was a mystical feature. If the interrogation is direct. Dr. Letterman of the inconsistent report linked to her activities at Gettysburg provided the answer. I've deepened my secret. Doctor, I have dedicated my life to the attenuation of human suffering, no matter where it happened. If my presence brings comfort to the wounded soldiers and of course helps them recover. Elimination of academic cure disease to my methods and opportunities. Time movement. In the way, for those who have become witnesses just like me. Maybe your witness is simply embarrassing. The battle and the confusion of emotional trauma when we saw so many deaths in such a short time. His gap prompted the doctors. A Letterman to organize a complete medical examination for a group of 3 independent doctors, including doctors. Professor of Anatomy, Principal Oliver Wendell Holmes, Harvard Medical School. One of America's most respected medical authorities. The results of this trial were conducted in Washington. In September 1863, D.C. provided the first scientific analysis. Elizabeth's impossible state. Dr. Holmes's report was recorded in secret. In investigations on medical abnormalities. It contradicts each well-known principle of human aging. The subject represents the outside. The appearance of a woman is 28 to 32 with no visible signs. Aging covers more than 20 years of documented history. The elasticity of the skin measured using standardized methods is. She was a woman in the late 1920s. Dental condition does not show where model. According to his suspected age of tooth enamel thickness corresponding to a person 20 years younger. Hair texture and pigmentation generally does not show any signs of gray or slimming associated with average age. Bone density. Measured with careful palpation and resistance exceeded the average dimensions of women of all ages. However, his hand inspection shows soulless patterns and wounds. Following decades of intensive medical work. Most notable is his knowledge of anatomy and surgical procedures exceeds that of a doctor in 20 years of practice. When asked a specific method, he explains how and experiences that involve participation in hundreds. Major surgical procedures. Contradictions between his obvious age and documented experiences are still impossible. Dr. Holmes. The test included detailed measurements and photographic documents using recently developed ones. Albumine printing. However, the photo attempts collided. The same mystical failure that hindered Alexander Gardner's efforts at Gettysburg. I use many exhibitions. There was an image with a completely empty plate or Elizabeth due to various camera and lighting conditions. It was just a black blur. Dr. Holmes was initially skeptical. Anomalies in the photographs reported on the battlefield found him unable to explain the consistent impairment. Captures the image of Elizabeth despite the clear visibility of direct observations. Comparison with previous medical cards in Baltimore showed that military observers were not possible. Documentation. Elizabeth Caldwell could not stand from 1840 and 1863 despite the complete medical documentation covering 23 years. Her physical measures recorded each year by various doctors using standardized methods. Variations of less than 1 in height, weight fluctuations in accordance with seasonal changes and lack of progression. Age-related changes in the structure of the bone, the condition of the skin or the health of the teeth, which more than 2 decades of life had to occur. Military investigations have been expanded. Reveals additional layers of complex mysteries, including Von Elizabeth and his family's history. Instead of clarifying your business. Her husband, Thomas Caldwell, died early on in Baltimore from an abdominal fever. 1863, however, when I looked up his death certificate, the difference was revealed. Possible tampering has been proposed. Documents were signed by a doctor who doesn't remember. Thomas Caldwell and hospital treatment were shown as the place of his death. He had no sign of gratitude. More amazing research into the name of her daughter, Elizabeth Hartwell. A genealogy of Elizabeth Hartwell's death in Philadelphia in 1824 at the age of 6. Either the woman treated by the Gettysburg soldiers used false personality or the death note was wrong. Although submitted, it cannot explain the adjustment of his documented existence in some cities. Decades. A military man working under the direction of Colonel Lafayette Baker. Interviews with more than 200 people who claim to have faced Elizabeth Caldwell between 1840 and 1863. The investigation led to an incredibly consistent portrait of a woman who has a lingering appearance. It has not been changed for 23 years. That medical knowledge exceeds training knowledge. The doctor and his presence were associated with an unusually high survival of the patient after his departure. However, the investigation also revealed surprising gaps in documented history. There was no file. His childhood, his education, or his life until 1840. Church entries on baptism. Admission documents to school and family genealogy did not contain traces of Elizabeth Hartwell or Elizabeth Caldwell. It mysteriously disappeared from military medical records, as it first appeared. His latest documented presence. She was at Washington Hospital in the Columbia area. Under close military supervision. November 17, 1863. She is unable to report the named features and the Army never sees it again. His staff. His exceptional medical devices and those containing annotated surgical texts were carefully discovered. His accommodation said, "My work has ended here. The injured are healed. Like all wars, war ends. Time tells you what time it opens." The official investigation into the disappearance of Elizabeth Caldwell continued sporadically in 1864. Use of resources from military information services and civil law enforcement agencies. Syndicate investigators interviewed the leader, hotel owner. The captain of the ship on the eastern edge has found no reliable evidence of its movement. Rear. On November 17, the investigation was extended to include some of the Union territory. Theorists suggested that she could go south, but the Southern medical records did not include links. Someone who responds to his explanations and possibilities. The final report is written. Edwin Stanton is classified by orders of military investigators and war ministers. Elizabeth Caldwell is an inexplainable medical abnormality. Modern scientific understanding. His documented presence at the Battle of Gettysburg, confirmed by some. Valued witnesses, including senior Army, provide opportunities. This exceeds normal human limits. No detailed investigation has been revealed. Proof of fraud, deception, or false identification. His medical knowledge is, according to it. Certainly, his physical condition doesn't help explain it. The case remains unresolved and recommended. Trust in military health services. Elizabeth Caldwell's classified files remained sealed in the Army. Until 1963, when the archive was briefly inspected during its 100th anniversary. The Battle of Gettysburg. Historians who studied the documents have found that they are very rare, so the majority. He rejected them as a confusion of wartime or administrative time errors. Several scientists. A person who took the evidence seriously after a university colleague Rydal who questioned the confidence of the evidence. Right under extreme stress on the battlefield. Nevertheless, this testimony remains a documented witness. Confidence is not questioned by other aspects of military service. Describe a woman who has challenged aging. That medical knowledge, despite its visible young appearance, appeared to cover it with years of experience despite its own uniqueness. Modern medical understanding gives potential explanations observed by Civil War doctors, but was not able to understand genetic countries that affect growth hormone production in adults and other countries. An increase in deficiency can slow the aging process considerably. Creation of people who appear to be younger than chronological. Rare metabolic disorders including certain forms of hypopieite can stop physical development. It allows intellectual abilities to continue to develop normally. Elizabeth Caldwell suffered from a combination of these conditions and may have produced a supernatural look. Young people, his real age usually accumulated. He was able to acquire his vast medical knowledge. It has been improved through years of intensive self-learning and practical experience. Exceptional memory and observation skills that allow for quick education in battles. Clear. During Gettysburg you can explain the impossibility of his presence in some places. The chaos of the fight is embarrassing report under the stress and natural tendencies of witnesses to adorn something extraordinary. Event. It can reflect the strange ability to predict patient outcomes. Exceptional diagnostic skills developed in years of medical practice, not supernatural understanding. I'll ask again. Keep that even modern science can't fully handle it. How Elizabeth acquired it. Surgical skills beyond the skills of previously trained military doctors. What allowed that obvious resistance to fatigue during an extended medical procedure? Why the photo? Despite the clear visibility of direct observations, is the instrument unable to constantly capture that image? What's wrong with her? Show knowledge of personal stories of patients that you have never shared. And perhaps the most mysterious. What happened to him after November 1863? The possibility of Elizabeth Caldwell. Suffering rare genetic countries that have strongly slowed the aging process provides reasonable grounds. To understand the documented evidence, she cannot explain all aspects of documented ability. Medical knowledge, his obvious immunity for fatigue, his supernatural diagnostic ability, and his mysterious disappearance means difficulties beyond simple medical explanations. Was she an extraordinary person in a rare nation that was misunderstood by drugs in the 19th century? Or some aspects of history that remain inexplicable? Elizabeth Caldwell's case. This is one of the most carefully documented medical puzzles in American history. The American Civil War created it. Unprecedented medical observations and documented conditions. Nevertheless, Elizabeth Caldwell's case stands out. Of all other medical abnormalities during this period, consistency and reliability of testimony. Observers and detailed investigations conducted by military authorities. It's proof that it's difficult to completely reject. Modern medicine can provide. While there are possible explanations for many aspects of that state, the complete image is also confusing today. It was 160 years ago. This enigma shows us even the most documented things we have. Historical events, some questions face simple answers. American Civil War. He has produced thousands of pages of military files, medical reports, and personal testimony. But in Elizabeth's case, Caldwell is also confused 160 years ago today. What do you think? Is there a story about this? You think it's all revealed, or you've built some secrets about a woman who's not old and remains buried in history? Leave a comment below and tell us in your opinion that it really arrived at Elizabeth Caldwell. If you like it, this story wants a more historical puzzle like this. A lover of unsolved puzzles from the past in America. Go to the next video and explore another video. The official notes were trying to forget about it.